What's up, everybody? It's movie time. All right, so this is the clip you should be watching right before you watch the chunk of film that I provided for you today from our feature film, Memphis Belle. Memphis Belle, as I explained in the last post, was the name of a bomber crew, the first crew to hit that 25 mission mark and complete their tour of duty. So going into it, you already know they make it. That probably is anticlimactic because in the film it's like, oh man, it gets really tense, and everything that can possibly go wrong does go wrong on their last mission. Which, like I had already explained to you, in reality it didn't play out that way. But I like this movie because it shows you all aspects of what a bomber crew was up against and all the obstacles that they would have to overcome to get to the bomb run and deliver their bombs right on the target. Or, as the captain in the movie says, drop them right in the pickle barrel, because a pickle barrel would be pretty small. And if you're 5 miles up in the sky, it would be a pretty hard target to hit. Anyway, that was some old slang from the war era. Now, in this one, I want to go over a couple things that you'll see in the movie. There are some inaccuracies in it, and it's just because it's a Hollywood movie. And they had a pretty good slate of actors in this movie. Most of them were pretty big stars back, kind of a generation ago when this film came out. Anyway, they always want to show their faces, and you want to hear the actors delivering lines. In reality, what would conditions be like in an open-aired bomber? Because these planes, even though they fly almost as high as like airliners would today, not quite, but like a passenger plane if you're going on spring break or something, they don't fly quite that high, but they go way up to a high altitude, and they have open like windows in it, with four big engines running. What would it be like? Well, let me tell you, it would be super loud, like so loud that you can't hear the guy right next to you. You'd be screaming at each other unless you're right in the cockpit or in the enclosed, like kind of nose part of the plane. If you were back in the belly of it or tail, you really, like, literally couldn't hear the guy next to you. Now, in the movie, they're talking to each other quite a bit. In reality, you would have to wear a comm set. You see that in the movie, they show it. Actually, these crews, it's like a radio that only goes internally in the plane. Now, they also have some other guys, a bomber and a navigator, that could operate a longer range radio where they could communicate back with the home base or with other planes in the squadron. But everybody on the crew, the gunners, which are six like enlisted guys, and the four officers, so the crews were like 10 guys total, would have a little comm set on, and you were supposed to have those on at all times when you were flying on a mission. Anything you said into the comm, it would go on the little walkie-talkie set, essentially right into the ears of everybody else, so everybody would hear what everybody else is saying, and you'd be able to call out enemy fighters or any other obstacles or problems that you might be encountering. What else would it be like flying up that high in a plane that is not pressurized? Well, it would be frigid cold. Like sometimes the temperatures could get to like 20, 30, 40 below. So that is frigid cold. If you've never experienced that, which we don't get weather that cold on the ground level here in Michigan very often, you can get hypothermia and die very quickly. That's why you'll notice these guys wear bomber jackets, which can still be, I still see people rocking those every now and then today. They kind of caught on and became fashionable after this part of the war, where a lot of these guys came back home and still were wearing their bomber jackets. That was some war memorabilia that they got to keep with them. Anyway, those jackets are wool lined. They're very thick, leather on the outside, to keep those guys warm. They would also have to wear gloves, because think, your hands get a little bit of moisture on them. And if you were to go touch one of your, like the guns, as an enemy fighter was coming in, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Christmas Story, where they dare that kid to lick the phone pole in the middle of winter and his tongue sticks to it. Essentially, the same thing would happen to your hands. If you, once you were at high altitude and it was frigid cold up there, if you went and touched the gun, your hands could just freeze right to it. And then you'd be able to get them off, but you're going to have to rip off your skin, and that's going to be painful. What a mess. Now, like I had said before, I'm not showing this whole movie. The characters in the film are fictionalized, and they're constantly arguing and bickering with each other. They did that in the movie because it makes for a better movie, adding in drama and contention and things like that. In real life, from what I know about the Memphis Belle crew, they were highly disciplined. They followed orders. They did what they were supposed to do. They were business first. So in the movie, you'll see some like talking back and banter. In real life, I don't think there was much of that on this crew. I think they followed the orders the captain gave. They respected their captain. But of course, that makes for probably a little bit drier movie when everybody gets along and everybody's functioning exactly how they're supposed to. My grandpa Houston, so I have two grandpas. Both of them are World War II veterans. I had spoke a little bit about my grandpa Stan Taluki, my dad's dad, who was in Patton's army. Well, my other grandpa, my mom's dad, Papa Houston, Houston James was his name. He was actually on a bomber crew during World War II also, and served a little bit after the crew of the Memphis Belle. So he was bombing Germany through late 1943. Actually, I think it was early 1944 when he flew his first mission, right on through to the end of the war. He has a lot of stories. He's actually still alive today. He's 96. He's getting up there. But growing up, he would often talk about the war and his experiences with me. Now, a lot of veterans don't like to do that. But often the guys that don't want to talk about war experiences, they're the ones that were up on the front lines and see really horrific, bloody stuff. My grandpa Stan, he experienced more of that as a ground soldier, like in the infantry as a machine gunner in Patton's army. Now, these guys in the air crews, what they're doing is one of the most dangerous jobs in the war, but it's very impersonal. You never come face to face with the enemy. You're always miles above them, and then you're dropping bombs and flying back. So I think the guys in the airmen, in some ways, may have been like less traumatized or less PTSD from their experiences in the war. Still, though, I loved hearing my grandpa's stories. I'll share a quick one with you. And he said his crew was very highly disciplined too. He had the option to go fly extra missions as a replacement top turret gunner. You'll see that in the movie where it's the machine gun that's mounted on a swivel, a hydraulic swivel at the very top of the plane. They're basically set right behind the pilot and co-pilot. Other crews, sometimes like one of your gunners would get shot by a German plane and one guy on the crew would die. Well, he could have gone and volunteered on other crews and got more missions. And then once you hit your 25 missions, or they eventually change it to 30 missions total, your tour of duty is done and you get sent home. He said he decided not to do that because his crew functioned very well. They all worked good together. And he knew a few other guys that had volunteered to try to get extra missions in because they wanted to get home back to their family. And then when they volunteered on a different crew that was a little bit less disciplined, they ended up getting shot down and the guys died. And he saw that, learned from that, and said, nah, no thanks. I'm not in that big of a rush. I do want to get back home, was kind of his mindset. But I want to have my best chance at survival, and my best chance at survival, he thought, was to just fly with his crew and stay with these guys that he's used to and that he trusts. And I do think in large part, most of these bomber crews were very tight knit and they knew each other. They worked close together, and literally their lives depended on one another. My grandpa was in this top turret, like a hydraulic swivel with two 50 cal machine guns on it. It was essentially almost like a video game where you'd have like a little joystick on it that you would control, and you could swivel around in the turret, so you could shoot 360 degrees from any direction, and then you could raise your guns up or down. So he was essentially responsible for protecting the plane from anything coming up above, any planes coming in, fighter planes dive bombing at them or diving at them and shooting. He said that, like, again, getting to how cold and loud it was and having to wear your comm set. He said one story that always stuck in my head, he told me, was he was up there, and most of the missions were between about 15 to almost 30 hours long, round trip, as you fly, drop your bombs, then fly back. Now, parts of the mission get action packed. When you get close to the bomb run, that's when German planes are swarming you and they're trying to pick you off. But a lot of that mission would be just flying up in the sky where nobody's really out to get you. Now, you have to keep your eyes peeled because you never know when the German fighters could come at you. But a lot of it would get kind of tedious and boring, where you're just up flying in a plane for extended periods of time. Anyway, he said wearing the comm set would get, you just don't want to wear earmuffs on you all day and they'd get uncomfortable. So one time he was up there and he had his parachute on like you were supposed to have. And just in case the plane broke apart or something, you had your parachute and you could hopefully land safely. Anyway, he had taken his comm set off and hung it over in another part of the plane. And as he was trying to get out of the turret, his parachute hung on the joysticks that would do the swivel. And he was halfway out of the turret and halfway in it. And that his backpack kind of grabbing that parachute turned it and it pressed him in that hydraulic swivel, and it was pushing him really hard, like pinching him so where he could barely breathe. And he said literally the pilot and co-pilot were like 6 feet in front of him. He could see them, he could almost touch them but not quite, and he was screaming at them and screaming at them to come help him out and get that unstuck so he could get out of the swivel. And he said he sat there for about 45 minutes screaming, yelling. They couldn't hear a word he was saying because that's how loud it is up there. And eventually the co-pilot turned around to do something else, saw what had happened, got my grandpa out of there. And my grandpa said it wasn't the pilot and co-pilot's fault. It was totally his fault for taking the comm set off. And he, I guess, had a big bruise down the front of his back, and the doctors yelled at him, and his crew kind of yelled at him for, being irresponsible and taking the comm set off. And he said that was the last time he ever did that. From there on, he always wore it through all of the missions. So know that there are some minor inaccuracies in this movie, like they're constantly taking their comm sets off and talking to each other. They often don't have all their protective gear on where you would need that because of how cold it is. They also bicker quite a bit, and they fictionalize a lot of things that really didn't happen to the Memphis Belle crew. So you might ask yourself, well, why the heck are you showing this movie, Taluki? I show it because I think it has pretty good entertainment value. It gives you a good visual of what it would have been like up in one of these bomber crews, and what it would have been like when you get close to the bomb run and you're about to drop your bombs on the target. So anyway, I think it gives you a lot of good visuals, and bottom line, everything that they show that went wrong for the Memphis Belle crew in the last mission, those were things, even though it didn't happen to the real Memphis Belle's crew on their last mission, literally, those were all the things they show are things that happened to various bomber crews throughout the war. And most of those things happened quite frequently. So I don't want to give too much away. Watch the film clip. I kind of skipped through the first part of the movie, and essentially where we pick up is about midway through the movie when they're starting their final bombing mission, and it goes right on through to the very tail end of the movie. It's about maybe 50 minutes or so long, about an hour worth of movie. So hopefully you like it. If you have any questions about it, shoot me an email, contact me, and I'll be happy to talk more with you about that, because the Allied Air War and strategic bombing are some of my favorite topics from World War II. All right, see ya.